Alright guys, welcome back to CSEC 1500. This is class 3. We're going to be talking about threat actors today. So in cybersecurity, threat actors are definitely, they're the reason why we're in business. They're the individual groups who seek to exploit the vulnerabilities within our networks and our systems. And we need to understand what they are, who they are, what kind of attacks they like to do, and how do we defend against these type of attacks? We need to figure out what their motivations are, what their capabilities are, and what their tactics are. So threat actors themselves can be motivated by financial gain, political objectives, personal grievances, or just, because they just want to be the cause of disruption. So each actor type that we'll go through today has a unique set of challenges, and we'll talk a little bit about each one of these, okay? So first of all, what makes up risk? Well, we talked about threats and vulnerabilities before. So what makes up risk? Well, we've got vulnerabilities plus the threat equals risk. So normally you can't have one without the other. If you have a vulnerability and no one was there to attack it, well, the risk would be very low. But once you have a threat and a vulnerability, we can then try to figure out what makes up our risk. And in this case, our risk actually could be high depending on how easy it is to attack and how good our threat is, whether or not it's a nation state hacker or maybe just a script kiddie. So let's talk about those. Before we get into threats themselves, we always have to have that conversation of what hat are you? So there are three different types of hats as an attacker. You can be a white hat, a black hat, or a gray hat as a attacker. And I'm hoping that every one of you out there are going to be white hats. White hats are ethical hackers. They're the hackers who we want to hire. They're the ones who try to protect things. Black hats are the ones that are trying to exploit us for whatever they might have for financial gain, political objectives, grievances, again, or just because they want to see the world burn. And then you got the gray hackers, who in the daytime are white hat, and they're the day-to-day ethical hackers, but at night they hide behind a mask and maybe do things that are not quite so, ethical. So, what are threat actors? Well, understanding the motivations between cyber attacks is essential for anticipating any of the threats that we're going to have and how we're going to defend against them. So the threat actors themselves are the people that we're trying to protect against. They can be an internal or an external threat. Internal being like an employee, and external being somebody we don't even know. It could be a competitor, it can be a nation state actor, whomever it may be. They're going to have some kind of motivation. Now, the motivation there's a lot of different motivations that a threat actor can have. As I said, we talked about financial gain, political. They may have an idea at hand. They might be a nation state. Maybe they're going for espionage. Maybe they have, maybe a challenge, or maybe it's even corporate espionage, where corporations try to fight against each other, try to take the other one down, or steal their intellectual property. So it could be malicious, but it could also be accidental. Someone answering the phone and giving away their password on the phone might be an accident, but they could be prone to a social engineering attack. And those kind of accidental threats, they happen. We just got to figure out how do we protect ourselves against it? Threat actors themselves do have a level of sophistication. So depending on what kind of threat actor we're dealing with, depends on what kind of resources they have, what kind of education they may have, or skill set they have, and how do we identify each one of these and protect against them? Each one's a little bit different. We talked a little bit about motivations already. Here's a few. Maybe they want the fame. Script kiddies or activists are always looking for fame. But maybe it's financial gain. Maybe they want to steal something or ransom your system so that way they can try to charge you for money. So the threat actors themselves do have a few different attributes, as we said. They could be internal or external level of sophistication can change. But the first type of threat actor I would like to talk about is what we like to call the unskilled attractors. aka script kiddies. Now, the script kiddies themselves, the attacks themselves are carried out by what we like to call script kiddies. They basically lack the technical expertise to develop their own attacks, but instead they like to use pre-made tools. These pre-made tools could be like Metasploit or some of the other tools that we need to learn about as we move through our cybersecurity education. So the best way to protect yourself against a hacker is to know the tools that they're using and protect against them. So again, unskilled attackers, or otherwise known as script kiddies, are typically individuals with no formal training. They're not going to have any of their own exploits. They're going to be using tutorials or pre-built tools, but despite their lack of skill, they can easily get into systems, especially for those who aren't very well protected. So just saying, hey, they're a script kiddie, they don't really have anything here, is something that I don't really want to hear from anybody. But definitely make sure that you understand what a script kiddie is or what an unskilled attacker is. But be aware that their motivation normally is going to be curiosity or maybe even just some fame. They tend to look for opportunity. So they're not looking for something. If something is there, they may act upon it. So they look for the low-hanging fruit. They sometimes act upon boredom or mischief, and sometimes it could be revenge or personal grievances. Someone who is trying to get back at somebody or something like that. Again, as I said, they're going to be using automated tools and scripts. They like to go for denial of service attacks, mainly because most of these floodings are pretty easy to do. It doesn't take very much work to do. They like to go for website defacements, brute force attacks, using pre-built malware, and really what they're looking to do is to do service disruptions, data breaches, reputational damage. And really the best way to protect against a script kiddie is to patch your software. As long as you are patching your software and that you're using MFA, multi-factor authentication, it's an easy way to protect against a script kiddie. Now, we still need to monitor and we need to respond to any activity that we may see. And definitely a lot of script kiddies like to talk, they like to show off, so it's pretty easy to get motivations from their peers to have them get turned in. The next one I want to talk about are hacktivists. Hacktivists themselves are a type of threat motivated by political, they could be done by social or ideological, I can't say the word, ideological causes. Unlike cyber criminals who are normally going for financial gain, hacktivists use their skills to promote their beliefs. So hacktivists normally are supporting a cause like PETA or freedom of speech or environmental protections or human rights. Hacktivists are going in for embarrassment. So they are the individuals and techniques, they form activism, and a lot of people already know different pieces of this. For instance, Anonymous. Anonymous is a hacktivist group. While each person inside the group may have a different ideology, it still is a hacktivist group. So some of the motivations that you're going to find, again, is political activism. Maybe they're against certain political parties or governments, or maybe even in response of policies they disagree with. It could be social justice, such as human rights, environmental protection, or anti-corruption. And you can have freedom of information. Think about WikiLeaks on this one. So a lot of hacktivists like to free flow information. They don't like censorship, and so they go towards release of the restrictions on data and make sure that we can get to it. Could be anti-corporate sentiment, which means that the corporations are engaging in unethical or exploitative behavior. They might attack a corporation to get back at them. And some of the techniques they like to use website defacement, because remember, they've got a message to get out. They like to do DDoSs, denial of service attacks, which means that they're trying to take down the service so they can't provide the service that they were going for. They might leak information to say, like, look how bad this corporation is. They might dox people. Doxing involves publicly posting of private information of like home addresses, phone numbers, emails. Basically, they like to steal information and then dox people. Now, you can have a lot of reputation damage, especially when it deals with a corporation, service disruption. You can have data breaches because while they're doxing people, that's still PII data, right? This is personally identifiable information. They could definitely get some identity theft going on there. You can have intellectual property problems, IP, and there could also be some legal consequences along it. So we've already known about Anonymous. They're pretty popular. Other people are like LulzSec. We've already mentioned WikiLeaks is another one. Well, how do we defend against it? Well, we just have to strengthen our web security because they love coming through web portals on these because they like to do things that are going to deface you as a corporation. We need to make sure we have DDoS protection, which is pretty popular now in most firewalls. We need to make sure that our data is encrypted and that our access controls are set up, because remember in our first chapter we talked a lot about confidentiality and integrity, and we need to make sure that both of those are still being met, as well as availability with the DDoS. We need to keep an eye on the public social media platforms to make sure that there isn't an uprising starting to happen. So the hacktivists themselves are pretty much, they've got a point to make and they're looking to make it, okay? Next, we've got organized crime. Organized crime refers to the highly structured groups of networks. Organized crime themselves are highly coordinated criminal groups that engage in cyber attacks to achieve financial gain. They normally are looking for financial gain. These groups operate like traditional crime syndicates, but often their activities take place in the digital world. So we're looking at cyber criminals, but they're definitely going to be skilled, they're going to be well funded, and they're really going to be in charge of a lot of these bigger activities such as businesses and governments. They use very sophisticated tactics to try to get back at other corporations and individuals, but really what they're looking for here is that their motivation is all about money. Money, blackmail, fraud, extortion, theft. These are all things that organized crime is looking to do. Okay. Now, the tactics that they like to use, they love to use ransomware. They love to use phishing and spear phishing. So basically, they're looking to get into the highest levels of the corporations. They love banking Trojans, basically to find ways to steal money from your corporations. They like to do carding, which means they're trying to steal credit card information. They love the use of botnets, which is a form of denial of service, but botnets are taking it to the next level where they're using compromised systems throughout the world to either, one, collect information, or they're using it to attack you all at once. So they're looking for service disruptions and reputational damage as well. So there's some pretty famous ones that happen in here. We've got like the dark side. They're the ones who did the Colonial Pipeline one not too long ago. Unfortunately, when they did that, it caused a lot of fuel shortages for the rest of us. You've got the Evil Corp, which is a Russian group. They like to do banking Trojans. And then you've got the Fin7 group, which definitely goes for hospitality. They normally attack hospitals. Now, how do we defend against these guys? Well, we just have to implement very strong access controls. Definitely have to have MFA. We definitely need to patch our systems. But one of the biggest things here that's a little bit different is they really rely on social engineering. So we need to really make sure that we are using employee training and awareness to ensure that our employees understand how to identify what a social engineering attack looks like and not to fall prey to it. One of the big things for ransomware is we just need to have a proper backup and disaster recovery plan. So just know that organized crime are highly structured groups that are looking for financial gain, okay? Next, we have our nation-state actors. Nation-state actors are usually sophisticated, but they're well funded because they are normally sponsored by governments. So in order for them to achieve geopolitical or national security objectives, For instance, China or Russia have some really big corporate espionage companies that they like to work with. These actors normally carry out targeted cyber attacks, so they're going to hit something specifically. Like not too long ago, they were hitting water pipelines, you know. But these nation state actors, what really makes them difference between cyber criminals is because their motivations are normally going to be on whatever the government wants. So it's normally political, it's economical, military interest even, rather than financial gain. They're not looking for financial gain. They're looking at whatever their government wants out of them. Now, nation-state actors are normally backed by the government, so we like to call them APTs, Advanced Persistent Threats. Now, Advanced Persistent Threats themselves are the ones who have the money. This is the way I look at this. And so if you have money, you have definitely ways of attacking in here. Now, the motivations of the nation-state actor, as we said, was government-related, but we're looking for espionage, we're looking for intelligence gathering, we're looking for disruption or sabotage, we're looking for economic advantages, maybe political influence. There's been a lot of talk that a lot of political parties use nation-state actors to attack other parties to win a vote or political gain. And so we've got to be careful about these kind of people because these are the big boys. The advanced persistent threats are the ones who are going to infiltrate a network and remain undetected for years. Sometimes they can be in your network and never know they are there. So they like to use things called zero-day exploits. These are the exploits that are not really known yet. They're vulnerabilities within the environment, but they're not known. And they may not be known to anybody. So they're 0 days, but they're unknown 0 days. And so they like to just sit there and gain persistence. Persistence means that these APTs just sit in the background quietly, acting like they belong, and nobody knows they are there. They love to do phishing, most of the time spear phishing attacks. And because these guys have a ton of money, they're going to be looking at supply chain attacks. Supply chain attacks are where we will get our supplier from somewhere. Most of our stuff will be built in another factory, but if they can infiltrate that factory and build some code into the firmware before you even get the computer or server, then it'd be easier for them to already be in the network. They like to do disinformation campaigns, basically fake news is what we like to call that now, right? They like to do a lot of these things. Now, the impact could be a whole bunch of different things. We can have the escalation of international conflicts. We can have political to destabilize political parties, a whole bunch of things. But the big one, the latest one that I can think of would probably be the SolarWinds attack. So SolarWinds in 2020 had a supply chain attack where the nation-state actor, believed to be Russia, compromised the systems and they were able to be in the background. Now the problem is SolarWinds is one of these people that, well, they have software in so many different corporations. So if they get their code into a product like SolarWinds, then it'd be very easy to notice. There's been other hardware companies out there who had their issues, such as Supermicro. Supermicro had firmware that was calling back home and allowing a back door to go back for the systems. And so there's definitely ways to doing this. Now, these guys are the hardest to protect against. So what do we need to defend? We're going to defend by using zero trust security, just like we learned in the last slide. We're not going to trust anybody anymore. We're now going to verify everything and everyone and make sure that they belong. We're going to do some advanced threat detection. Advanced threat detection is a newer product, but it is a way that you can try to identify nation-state activity. We're going to look at our supply chain risk management, and we're going to make sure that our supply chain is being safe and secure. We're going to do our employee training because, you know, users are always our weakest link. And we're going to make sure that we keep these nation-state actors outside our network. Now, one of the last ones we need to talk about is insider threats. Insider threats refer to security posed by individuals within our organizations. They already have authorized access into systems, data, or even facilities because they're an employee most of the time. These individuals may intentionally or unintentionally cause issues for us, And sometimes they can be sabotaging systems, introducing vulnerabilities, or unlike external attacks, they already have a level of trust. So zero trust is a little harder for us because we already trust our employee. So how do we identify who is the insider threat? Well, insider threats come in many different ways and forms, but there are different types. There's the malicious insiders. Malicious insiders are individuals who intentionally misuse their access to harm the organization. Maybe it's personal gain, maybe it's revenge. You're not going to fire me. I'm going to logic bomb you and blow everything up when I leave, i.e., delete everything. Maybe I purposely do not document anything, so that way I call it job security. There could be the unintentional insiders who accidentally cause security breaches just because they don't know. It could be negligence, it could be lack of awareness, or even human error. Have you ever seen someone bring in like a mini router or a wireless access point because they just thought it was easier than calling IT? Well, this is our unintentional insiders. They can definitely cause issue for us. Now, if it was an intentional, we do have some motivations that they may want to go for. It could be financial gain, could be a corporate espionage where another corporation is paying them off to steal some data. Could be revenge or grievance. It could be that they just don't believe in what the company's doing anymore. Or it could just be a mistake. So it always happens all the time. Now, what they're looking to do, though, if they are intentional or even unintentional, is they're looking for data exfiltration. They're normally trying to abuse the privileges we've already given them and maybe even sabotage or try to phish or social engineer their way into other things, because now we're talking about other colleagues, their friends. If I walked up to you and I didn't have access to do something, but I talked you into doing it, now I still got what I wanted, but it was still a malicious intent. Now, how do we detect these insider threats? Well, there are a lot of different ways to detect them nowadays, but one of the ways is called user behavior analytics, UBA. User behavior analytics is a way that we can look at your day-to-day behavior. Most of us do the same job day in and day out and do the same things. But if we notice that this one user all of a sudden is downloading a ton of data from a drive that they normally don't access, well, we can bring up an alert and go figure out, hey, is there an investigation that needs to happen here? Is this legit, or is there something going on? We can include different platforms like data loss protection, DLP. We can add additional monitoring and auditing, or we can always just keep an eye on access controls and privilege management. We need to make sure that as an employee moves from one position to another, that their risk or their permissions update with that position. So definitely know that an insider threat could be malicious, or it could be intentional or unintentional, but just know that insider threats are the hardest ones to protect against because they were already inside our network. Okay, one of our final ones here is going to be shadow IT. And shadow IT refers to the information where any technology or software used within an organization is not approved by IT. So these are the people that installed another piece of software to try to get their job done, but didn't go by IT to do so. Maybe they implemented something that was very insecure, and this is normally what happens when an IT department is either insufficient or slow or even overly restrictive. I always joke about strict parents breed strict or sneaky kids. Well, it's the same way with IT. If IT is overly restrictive in your corporation, your employees are going to be sneaky, and they're going to be the ones that are going to be bringing in things to try to bypass the security that you put in place. So we have to make sure that, we take away that convenience factor. We go around and we make sure that the employees are getting what they need, because if not, they're going to try to find a way to make it happen. They're going to find convenience. They're going to try to install things that they shouldn't be. And sometimes it's just a lack of awareness. Our users are not security professionals. That's what we're here for. But other things that can bring in is like maybe they brought their own laptop into the environment and plugged it into the network. Well, what if that laptop was infected? What if they introduce a vulnerability within our network and now we've got a new threat to handle? So Some of the risks that we're going to have here is we're just going to have those additional vulnerabilities. We could have some data loss. We can have compliance violations. And my goodness, those are probably the most expensive. If you are GDPR or HIPAA or PCI, you're getting audited. Next thing you know, you fail your audit because shadow IT, someone that came in and installed something, those could come with a hefty financial ticket, a violation. Sorry. And so this is what we're looking for here. So operational inefficiencies, it increases our attack surface. So we haven't talked about attack surface yet, but we'll keep talking a little bit about it until we get to the section. But attack surfaces is how big is our footprint. The more we have to manage, the more things that the threats can attack. So what we like to do is minimize as much as we can on our network to the fact that at least, the job can get done and there's not a whole bunch of open systems sitting there that the attackers can then gain a foothold into. So when we're detecting it, we've got to use our network monitor. We've got to use our asset discovery. We need to make sure that our policies are clear and that we are offering approved alternatives. We are keeping a quick and open mind, and we're trying not to make our users' lives hell. We're trying to help them. We're trying to do what's best for them, but as well as keep our corporations secure, which brings us to educating our employees. Sometimes you're just going to have to tell them no, but please make sure that the employee understands why you're saying no and you're not just being an ass, right? So make sure you go through that. Shadow IT discovery tools. Basically, you can use tools inside your network to make sure that if there is something that was in the unapproved list, that you'll be able to find it and deal with it as soon as possible. So let's talk about those attack surfaces a little bit more. So the attack surface itself is a point where the attacker can discover, exploit a vulnerability in a network and application, right? That's the definition of an attack surface. But these threat vectors themselves is what we also like to say is, well, how did they come in? Which means did they come in? A threat vector is the pathway or the method they use to infiltrate a system. So threat vectors can be phishing or software vulnerabilities or insider threats or so many different other things, right? Supply chain, we've talked about a few of these. We've talked about malware. We can talk about insider threats and brute force attacks or social engineering. There's a whole bunch of things. But when we're talking about our attack surfaces, we need to make sure that the attack surfaces are entry points where an attacker can attempt unauthorized access to our system is minimized to the best we can. Now, there are a lot of different types of attacks for attack surfaces. We can do the physical attack surface, which includes all physical access, such as servers or workstations. Imagine if you're a global company and you have hardware across the globe. It just makes it real easy to get into your hardware because how are you going to keep an eye on everything? We've got the human side of attack surfaces, where you've got the employees or contractors. What if we social engineer them, phish them, or exploit their human error? There are a lot of times where social engineering is just people just show up on site and they just act like they belong and nobody wants to tell them to go away or who are you? So we have to definitely double check all of that. Now, how do we outsmart these threat actors, really? Well, in order to outsmart the threat actors, we do need to use threat intelligence. Threat intelligence is a way that we can stay ahead by gathering data and try to anticipate what kind of threats are happening. Now, threat intelligence, there's multiple ways of doing it, but really, it's all about what's happening in the world today. We start seeing an uptick in ransomware attacks. We need to make sure that we protect against that. And so we need to make sure that we're patching and we're updating our systems. We can do red team or blue team exercises where we can simulate the attackers or the defense and try to protect our environment the best we can. Now, we're not going to attack our environment, but maybe we'll simulate it and we'll try to protect everything. Now, there are different types of threat actors as we talked about, and so the strategies is definitely going to be through threat hunting. So rather for waiting for the attack to happen, we're going to search for the threats within our network through threat hunting. We're going to monitor network activity. We're going to analyze unusual behavior. We're going to identify indicators of compromise, anything that can signal a breach within our network. We use different advanced tools to identify and mitigate threats, and hopefully before they can cause significant damage. Because if we can find something like, let's say, a command and control connection where an attacker is already in our network and we found their outbound connection, maybe we can cut them off before they cause any more problem. We can definitely implement our zero trust security model, just saying we don't trust anything, and let's start building upon that. We need to make sure that MFA is implemented on every user account, not only the users, but our service accounts. We can segment our networks. Now, many of us have gone through the Network Plus or CCNA classes, and those classes teach us that we can use VLANs, we can use network segmentation to help minimize or isolate segments within our network to limit the spread of an attack. We need to patch our system. We may want to use a SIM or an EDR. A SIM is a security information event management system. We'll talk more about those. Or we can use an EDR, which we'll talk more about as well, which is an endpoint detection response system, something that we can put on the end devices to help detect things. We've talked about user behavior analytics to make sure that the users are doing what they say they're supposed to be doing and making sure that our users are fully trained. Now, this list can go on, and we can talk about how to outsmart threat actors, but we really have to look at each one and who's actually trying to attack our system. Is it script kiddies? Is it hacktivists? Is it cyber criminals? Is it APTs? Who is coming after us, and how do we need to defend against it? Now, there are a lot of crossover where we do basic security practices that will cover us for most of these attacks, but there are times where we need to figure out what is the best practice for us to determine how to outsmart the threat actors. So that's the end of this section. Our next section is going to be on physical security. If you have any questions along the way, go into Canvas, go wherever you need to go, ask some questions, keep studying, and we'll make our way through all 27 versions of this series so that we can be ready to take our Security Plus.